Military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Donald Trump just had his mission accomplished moment. Bobby Jones here for MeidasTouch and Valor Media Networks in for Ken Harbaugh this week. The clip you just saw was Donald Trump proclaiming the massive success of the United States strike in Iranian territory to disable the capability of Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon. He was over the top with his praise on how spectacular and how successful this mission was. And when he made this announcement, it was solely, as he said many times, to stop Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. Well, the dust has settled. The battle damage assessment is ongoing, and now we're starting to see a shift in what the actual goal is.
Unequivocally, I think President Trump made the right decision for America to attack Iran's nuclear weapons program. And I think we're on the verge of potentially seeing regime change in Iran as part of that. I think this is a huge change in the Middle East. It was a decisive action. It was the right thing to do. I thought somebody should do it for a long time, but better late than never.
Biggest question in Washington right now is what the level of U.S. involvement will be from here, as you guys have been talking about. And we have seen some mixed signals on that today. Just in the last 2 hours, the president posting on social media suggesting that the U.S. could be considering pushing for a full regime change in Iran. He wrote that while it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, if the current regime is unable to make Iran great again, then why wouldn't there be a regime change? And that would likely mean greater U.S. involvement from where we are now, instead of a return quite quickly to the negotiating table. And that directly contradicts everything that we've heard so far today from senior Trump officials. So Vice President J.D. Vance this morning saying the U.S. view had been, quote, very clear that we don't want a regime change. Pete Hegseth saying that it was not what the mission was about. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio called it, quote, certainly not the goal of what they've been working on. So this was last night, all three of those men standing behind the president as he made that announcement, and the president now going further than all three of them. At the same time, the administration now is bracing for potential retaliation. NBC News is reporting tonight that Iran sent the president a message at last week's G7 threatening to attack the U.S. at home here in the U.S. via sleeper cells if the administration went ahead with the strikes as they've now done. The Department of Homeland Security is also warning earlier today that the conflict is causing what they called an ongoing threat environment in the U.S., and they say cyber attacks in particular could be likely. So a lot of things to watch as we head into this week. I'll note, guys, we haven't seen the president on camera at any point today.
The Middle East, as far as United States relations, is complicated. I know it pretty well. I served there many, many times. And most importantly, I understand the ballistic missile capability and threats that Iran and other nations in the region pose. That being said, when Donald Trump said the whole point of this strike was to stop Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon, there were many people who, despite his promises on the campaign trail about not starting new wars in the Middle East, they said that made sense to finally disarm Iran. As you can see, we went from being told this was to stop a weapon from being obtained by Iran to now possible regime change. Let me say that again, regime change. Even the Israelis have shifted the tone. Why? Because the military operation, even though it was executed successfully, may not have gotten the desired results. Fordow is still standing, and there are other nuclear capabilities and other nuclear locations that are still possibly online. So what has President Trump done? He has now moved the goalpost. No way can he be seen as someone who failed to execute this mission when the world watches. So if you look at his social media tweets, he's now saying, why not have a regime change? The problem with having this regime change is the day after. Just like we had to worry about what was going to happen the day after, we have to worry about the Iranian response, number one. But number two, most importantly, let's say, and play this out for a second, let's say regime change starts to occur in Iran. Who's filling the power vacuum? Who's going to make sure that the nation is not going to deteriorate into a terrorist state? Who's going to put boots on the ground to rebuild that nation? Now, the United States has a little bit of history in the area trying to do exactly that. And to be completely honest, we failed at it because we did not account for that in our planning and our execution. Now, 2025, it seems like we have not learned any of those lessons. And the irony of this is President Donald Trump, who was a civilian when all this was happening, was very vocal and very critical of the decisions that President Bush and President Obama made regarding nation building, occupying Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. Now he is doing the same thing, if not worse, because we don't know what the objectives of the strikes were. We don't know what the desired end state is. And most importantly, we have no idea how it's going to affect the people both in Iran and the surrounding area. This pivotal crossroads in the history of that region is now occurring where the United States has shrunk its National Security Council staffing by half and has seen a reduction in the president's inner circle to just those he overwhelmingly trusts, who are mostly military, and the Secretary of State and the CIA director. The Department of Defense, i.e. Pete Hegseth, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, none of them are having direct input on what should happen next. And so with the reduced State Department too, as far as subject matter expertise, we have to see and try to plan a path moving forward. But neither Israel or the United States can tell you what the end state, what the successful metric of these operations look like. And that should terrify everybody. These are the exact same conditions the United States got caught up in with Vietnam and in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Trump administration has made the messaging decision to focus on the actual military operation and to spend time on the complexity and talk about the bravery and the professionalism of the American armed forces that executed it. And while all of that is true, they're doing this on purpose to take away from the logical questions of what's next, what success looks like, and what is the long-term goal for stability in the region. The reason they're doing this is very simple. They don't have an answer. And so when I say this is Donald Trump's mission accomplished moment, President George W. Bush did the same thing in the initial invasion in Iraq because the military operation was successful. However, it was quickly obvious that the United States did not have a plan to win the peace. And here we are almost 20 years later, over 20 years later, and it's the same exact scenario.
New Meidas merch drop. Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more. All at store.MeidasTouch.com.